Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision. It feels like engineering.
Right.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is, broken.
Yeah, it is binary, broken or not broken. The process is, it's clean, objective, and undeniable.
And it is comforting in a strange way, isn't it? We like things to be visible, to be categorized, and most of all, we like them to have a straightforward mechanical fix.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, put a cast on it, wait 6 weeks, and you were good to go. But I want you to think about this scenario.
Okay.
What if a doctor walked into the room, looked at a patient suffering from a terminal systemic blood-borne disease, and offered them a Band-Aid? Like,
Wow.
they see the patient is bleeding a little from a scratch, so they slap a piece of adhesive over it, and they are completely ignoring the fact that the patient's internal organs are shutting down.
I mean, you would call that medical malpractice of the highest order.
Spot on.
The doctor is treating a superficial symptom, while the patient is actively dying from a fatal virus.
Yeah, and welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are asking a very uncomfortable question. What if the modern church is completely misdiagnosing the fundamental problem of humanity in that exact same way?
That is a heavy thought.
It really is. We are taking a deep dive into an ancient encounter today, an encounter that completely rewrites the script on why we share the gospel, how we view human need, and what the actual cure is for a world that is, fundamentally broken.
And we're looking at a landscape today where a lot of what gets called missions or evangelism looks an awful lot like handing out Band-Aids in an oncology ward.
Right, so let's set the stage for the listener, because when you look at the modern landscape, you see this massive crisis, don't you?
You really do. We have basically replaced theology with sociology.
Yeah.
You see a church culture heavily polluted by pragmatism. The driving question is no longer what is true, but instead people ask what works.
Right, like if a certain demographic responds well to a specific type of music.
Or a particular social program, or, a highly polished marketing campaign, we just do that. Then you have the seeker-sensitive movement,
Oh, yeah.
which asks what attracts people. The goal becomes removing any potential offense from the message.
And then on top of that, you have liberal theology, which tries to improve society and smooth over inequality while completely avoiding the reality of divine judgment.
Yeah, and when you stack all those approaches together, you get a version of Christianity that functions like a humanitarian relief project. It has Christian vocabulary attached to it. People use words like blessing and love and community, but it lacks any eternal weight.
Right. The focus shifts heavily toward alleviating physical poverty, providing education, or promoting secular notions of social equity.
Which, to be fair, treating symptoms like poverty and injustice is good.
Oh, absolutely. But if you stop there, if you view human need purely through a physical or sociological lens, you are treating the symptoms while ignoring the fatal virus.
And that gets to the core of the issue. If you replace theology with sociology, you degrade the gospel entirely.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit.
Well, let's think about how this changes our view of God. If God is viewed simply as like a therapeutic life coach.
Right, someone who is just there to help you self-actualize.
Yeah, find your purpose and feel better about your daily struggles. Then the problem of sin is reduced to a psychological wound or a social disadvantage.
It becomes, you are hurting because society failed you.
Or you are acting out because you lack self-esteem.
Yeah.
But there is a vital theological premise we have to establish right out of the gate here.
Lay it on us.
If God is not infinitely holy, then sin is not infinitely offensive.
Wow.
And if sin is not infinitely offensive to a holy creator, then the cross was a massive overreaction.
That is such a clear way to put it. Because if the cross was an overreaction, then there is absolutely no need to cross an ocean or even cross the street to tell someone about Jesus.
Right.
Like if the deepest human problem is just a lack of education, then missions is just building schools.
Yeah. If the deepest human problem is poverty, then missions is just economics. But if the deepest problem is objective guilt before an infinitely holy God, then that changes everything.
It changes the entire paradigm.
So to really understand this fatal virus of sin and the true cure, we have to get out of our modern, sterilized context.
We do. We have to travel back to an ancient geopolitical crisis.
We are heading to the year 740 BC, right? A time when an earthly throne was suddenly left empty.
Yes, we are anchoring this entire conversation in the opening phrase of the book of Isaiah, chapter 6. It starts with 6 words, in the year that King Uzziah died.
And to a modern reader scanning the text, that just sounds like a dry date on a historical calendar.
Yeah, it is like saying in the year 1994.
Right. But to the original audience, to the people of Judah, that phrase was loaded with extreme, paralyzing anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. If you are listening to this right now, think about what gives you a sense of security in your day-to-day life.
Is it your job? Is it your savings account? Or maybe the political stability of your country? Well, Uzziah was Judah's 401k. He was their strong man, their security blanket.
And he had reigned for 52 years.
Think about that time frame.
Yeah, for the vast majority of the population, Uzziah was the only king they'd ever known. You were born, you grew up, you got married, you had kids, and Uzziah was always on the throne.
And he was wildly successful, too. Under his reign, Judah experienced what historians call a golden age. He brought immense economic stability. He expanded their military capabilities. He was a master of agriculture.
Right, building towers in the wilderness and digging cisterns.
Yeah, because he loved the soil. He fortified the walls of Jerusalem with specialized defensive engines. The surrounding nations paid him tribute.
He was a picture of an untouchable, divinely blessed monarch.
But the timing of his death is what creates this perfect storm of national terror.
Because right when Judah loses their 52-year champion, there's a monster waking up next door.
You have to picture the geopolitical landscape of the ancient Near East at this moment. It was a cauldron of instability.
Yeah.
Just over the horizon, the Assyrian Empire is rising as an unstoppable superpower. They are under the ruthless leadership of Tiglath-Pileser III.
And when we say ruthless, we are not talking about a standard military opponent.
Not at all. The Assyrians were the terrorists of the ancient world. They relied on extreme psychological warfare.
Right.
When they conquered a city, they didn't just occupy it. They made horrifying examples of the population to ensure the next city would surrender without a fight.
We are talking about skinning rival kings alive and pinning their hides to the city walls.
It's gruesome.
It is. We are talking about massive deportations, piling up the skulls of their enemies and using sheer terror to subjugate the region.
It is a level of brutality that is hard for us to even comprehend today.
And there is the tiny nation of Judah, wedged right between hostile regional powers and this looming Assyrian war machine.
So the Assyrian threat is escalating. And right at that peak moment of vulnerability, the anchor of Judah's stability dies.
But his story does not end with a noble state funeral, does it?
No, it ends under a dark, shameful shadow. 2 Chronicles 20:6 details how Uzziah's unprecedented success bred a fatal arrogance within him.
He grew proud.
He looked at all his military victories, all his wealth, and he decided that the standard rules no longer applied to him.
Right?
He presumptuously entered the temple of the Lord to unlawfully burn incense on the altar.
Wait, hold on. This is where I have to push back a little, or at least ask the question that any modern person is going to ask when they hear this story.
Sure.
52 years of peace. 52 years of doing what is right, building up the nation, securing the borders.
Yeah.
He makes one mistake in the temple, one moment of overstepping his bounds to burn some incense, and he gets struck with instant leprosy.
That sounds incredibly harsh to a modern ear.
It really does. Isn't God overreacting here? Why did the judgment have to be so immediate and so physical?
That reaction, feeling like God is being too harsh, is the exact symptom of our modern misdiagnosis.
Okay, say more about that.
We have domesticated God. We have turned him into a harmless, friendly figure, a cosmic grandfather who overlooks our minor infractions because we generally mean well.
Oh, wow.
But the ancient text portrays a God whose moral purity is absolute and consuming. You cannot bypass God's ordained boundaries.
Right, because God had established that only the consecrated priests, the descendants of Aaron, were permitted to offer incense.
Exactly. I mean, it was a strict separation of church and state, to use modern terms. The king held civil authority. The priest held religious authority.
And Uzziah, in his arrogance, attempted to consolidate both. He attempted to usurp the office of the priest.
Yes, he assumed his earthly royalty gave him special privileges with the divine.
So when the priest confronted him, telling him to leave the sanctuary, Uzziah became enraged.
And right there, while he stood angrily before the priests with the censer in his hand, leprosy broke out on his forehead. Uzziah's leprosy is a physical manifestation of his spiritual uncleanness. It is a visual, undeniable proof that approaching God without the proper mediator is lethal.
So when he approached God on his own terms, relying on his own resume of accomplishments, he was met with the consuming fire of divine justice.
Precisely. The king who conquered nations was literally thrust out of the temple by the priests.
He had to live in a separate, isolated house as a leper until the day he died.
He was completely cut off from the house of the Lord. He couldn't even be buried in the same field as the other kings.
So when Isaiah writes, in the year that King Uzziah died, he is recalling the terrifying reality of a monarch who dared to trifle with the unapproachable holiness of God.
Yes, Uzziah profaned God's holiness and died in disgrace.
So the earthly throne is empty, the earthly king is a rotting corpse, and the nation is plunged into a massive identity crisis.
Their false security is completely shattered. They are mourning their fallen champion, they are dreading the Assyrians, and they are suddenly realizing that the God they claim to worship is not a tame deity they can manipulate.
So what happens to a nation when their king falls in disgrace and the ultimate enemy is marching toward their borders?
God issues a subpoena.
Because Uzziah's pride ruined the nation's sense of security, the prophet Isaiah steps in to deliver a devastating legal indictment against Judah's hypocritical religion.
We have to look at the literary context leading up to chapter 6. It is vital to read the book of Isaiah as a unified whole.
Yeah, because for a long time, there was a trend in critical scholarship to fragment the book into multiple authors.
Right. You would hear terms like Deutero-Isaiah or Trito-Isaiah, suggesting that chapters 1 through 39 were written by the historical Isaiah, and the later chapters were written centuries later by someone else.
Simply because the scholars didn't believe predictive prophecy was possible.
Yeah, let's clarify that for the listener.
Yeah.
That critical view basically assumes that if the text accurately predicts the Babylonian exile and the Persian king Cyrus by name long before they happened, it must have been written after the fact.
It is a bias against the supernatural, but we are looking at the text as it presents itself, a singular, cohesive vision given to one prophet.
And within this unified structure, the first 5 chapters of Isaiah act as a divine lawsuit. In Hebrew, the term is a rib.
A rib?
Yes, God is acting as the prosecuting attorney against a nation whose hands are full of blood, yet who still perform all the outward religious rituals.
God calls the heavens and the earth to the witness stand to testify against his own people.
And the hypocrisy Isaiah describes is staggering. God tells them, I have had enough of your burnt offerings.
Right, your incense is an abomination to me.
He says, when you spread out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood.
They are going through the religious motions, they are keeping the festivals, but their leaders love bribes, they run after gifts, they do not defend the orphan, and the widow's plea never reaches them.
It is a total moral collapse. And then chapter 5 features this brilliant, tragic parable called the Song of the Vineyard.
Oh, I love this part.
God describes how he lovingly planted Israel as a choice vineyard on a fertile hill. You have to understand what viticulture meant in the ancient Near East.
Right.
It was incredibly labor-intensive. You had to manually dig up the soil, clear out heavy stones by hand, plant the choicest vines.
You'd build a watchtower for protection.
Yeah, and hew out a wine vat in the solid rock. The owner invests everything into this vineyard.
He gives it every possible advantage.
He expects sweet, cultivated grapes.
Yeah.
But when the harvest comes, the vineyard yields toxic, wild grapes. It yields bloodshed and distress.
The people of Judah have taken all of God's covenant blessings and produced utter corruption.
This leads directly into 6 devastating woes pronounced at the end of chapter 5.
Isaiah stands up and declares woe upon the greedy land grabbers who add house to house until there is no room left for anyone else.
He declares woe upon the drunkards who rise early just to chase strong drink.
He pronounces woe upon those who mock God, pulling their sin along with cart ropes.
He declares woe upon those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light.
He declares woe upon the prideful who are wise in their own eyes, and woe upon the corrupt judges who acquit the guilty for a bribe.
So for 5 solid chapters, Isaiah has been pointing his prophetic finger at the society around him.
He is the righteous preacher, condemning their total failure to uphold the law of God.
He is delivering the closing argument of the prosecution, laying out airtight evidence of Judah's guilt.
But then we hit chapter 6, and the transition is startling. It is a massive literary hinge.
It really is.
After pronouncing 6 outward woes on everyone else, the land grabbers, the drunkards, the corrupt politicians, Isaiah suddenly turns the prophetic curse upon himself.
Yes.
I keep thinking of this like a prosecuting attorney who has just finished a blistering closing argument against a room full of criminals. He has the jury entirely convinced.
Okay.
And then he suddenly turns the spotlight onto his own face, drops his briefcase, and confesses his own guilt to the judge.
That's a great image.
Why does he do this? How does this structural pivot guard anyone who preaches against self-righteousness?
It forces the reader to understand that the standard of God's judgment is not relative human morality. We naturally love to grade on a curve.
Oh, we do all the time.
We compare ourselves to other people. We think, well, I might have my flaws, but I'm certainly not as bad as the corrupt judge or the greedy corporate executive.
And Isaiah was doing the exact same thing. He was the moral compass of the nation.
But then the earthly throne room fades away. Isaiah is no longer comparing himself to the corrupt society of Judah.
He is suddenly standing before the absolute burning holiness of God's own nature.
This structural pivot shows that no servant of God may denounce the sins of the culture without first standing condemn themselves.
And the reason the prophet suddenly turns the condemnation upon himself is specifically because of what he sees.
Yes.
We are at Isaiah 6, verses 1 through 4. Uzziah is dead. The Assyrians are coming. And in the middle of that geopolitical terror, Isaiah receives a vision.
He sees Adonai, the sovereign master, sitting undisturbed on a high and lofty throne.
The Hebrew text here is so deliberate. Let's look at that title used, Adonai.
Yeah, Adonai emphasizes God's absolute mastery, authority, and ownership over all creation. It is the title of the supreme boss.
And the posture is vital. He is sitting.
The grammatical participle portrays total control and calm rule. Earthly kings die, nations panic, superpowers rise and fall. But Adonai sits undisturbed.
He is not pacing the floor of heaven worrying about Tiglath-Pileser III.
Not at all.
And the text says the hem of his robe fills the temple. Think about the scale of that imagery.
It's massive.
The robe is a symbol of royal majesty. And just the trailing edge of it, just the hem, completely fills the entire temple space.
It communicates an overwhelming, suffocating majesty. The earthly sanctuary, which is the pride of Jerusalem, becomes a tiny, inadequate theater for his heavenly kingship.
Right. God is not contained by the temple. The temple is overwhelmed by God.
And stationed above him are the seraphim. This is the only place in the Bible where these specific creatures are mentioned by name.
The word literally translates to the burning ones, right?
Yes, the burning ones. These are sinless, majestic, heavenly beings. They exist entirely in the presence of God.
And yet, look at their posture. They each have 6 wings. With 2 wings, they cover their faces. With 2, they cover their feet. And with 2, they fly.
Let's unpack the wings, because it is not just biological anatomy. It is deeply theological.
Yeah.
They're sinless creatures, yet they have to cover their faces. It shows a reverent inability to casually gaze upon divine glory.
Even unfallen angels cannot stare directly into the unshielded face of God without being undone.
Exactly. Then they cover their feet. In the ancient world, covering the feet was a sign of intense humility and modesty before a superior.
And with 2 wings they fly, meaning they're hovering, entirely ready for immediate, instantaneous service.
Their posture completely rebukes the flippant way we often approach worship or casual religious activism.
Oh, absolutely.
These burning ones do not treat God's presence lightly. They do not presume upon his grace.
They are engaged in an antiphonal cry, calling out to one another in the trisagion. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory.
That repetition is so fascinating. In English, if we want to emphasize something, we use bold text or italics, or we add an exclamation point.
We might say someone is very holy or extremely holy.
Right. But ancient Hebrew syntax doesn't have punctuation like that. In Hebrew, repetition serves as the method of emphasis.
Okay.
If you want to say a pit is deep, you say it is a pit.
A pit. I like that.
To say something twice emphasizes it. But to say it 3 times, a threefold repetition, elevates the attribute to the absolute maximum degree. It is the superlative.
God is not just holy among a list of other attributes. He is supremely, infinitely, uniquely holy.
There is a quote from the theologian A.W. Tozer that points out that God does not conform to an external standard of holiness.
Right.
We often think of holiness as a list of rules that God happens to follow perfectly. But Tozer argues that God is the standard.
Whatever God is holy.
Yes. His holiness is his absolute otherness. He is entirely separate from creation and completely devoid of any moral deficiency.
And the seraphim declare that the whole earth is full of his glory. We need to distinguish those 2 terms, don't we?
Yes. Holiness is God's concealed glory. Glory is God's revealed holiness. Glory, kavod in Hebrew, implies weight, substance, and visible splendor. The visible manifestation of God's invisible perfection is filling the whole earth.
Kavod, weight. And this manifestation is so intense, so overwhelmingly weighty that the text says the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called and the house was filled with smoke.
Yeah.
I have to point out the frightening math here.
Well, the math is terrifying.
If sinless, burning angels, creatures who have never rebelled, who reflect the fiery holiness of God, if they have to hide their faces from this light, what chance does a fallen human have?
None. Zero.
Is this why the thresholds are shaking? Is it because the sheer weight of this purity is structurally destructive to anything less than itself?
Absolutely. Think about the physics of sound and resonance. If a frequency is powerful enough, it shatters glass.
Right.
The voice of the seraphim declaring the holiness of God is shattering the structural integrity of the temple. The chasm between the uncreated God and an unfallen angel is infinite.
Wow.
But the chasm between the uncreated God and a fallen, sinful human creature is exponentially worse. The physical shaking of the temple mirrors the spiritual shattering that is happening to Isaiah.
The sheer weight of God's purity cannot be tolerated by a fallen world.
And the smoke filling the house is the Shekinah glory. It is the thick cloud that reveals his presence while simultaneously and graciously obscuring his full lethal brilliance from Isaiah's eyes.
So if the smoke wasn't there, Isaiah would have been instantly incinerated.
He would be gone.
When the structural integrity of the temple starts failing under the weight of this purity, Isaiah realizes his own structural integrity is failing too. He breaks down completely.
Yeah.
He cries out, "Woe is me, for I am lost." And that word lost doesn't mean he misplaced his keys. The Hebrew word is nidmeti.
Nidmeti implies being ruined, completely destroyed, forced into silence, or struck dumb.
Wow.
Isaiah is looking at the absolute standard of moral perfection, and the light of that holiness completely annihilates his self-righteousness.
Keep in mind, Isaiah is the guy who just spent 5 chapters pronouncing woe on everyone else.
Exactly.
He is the prophet. He is the guy who goes to church every Sunday, tithes, leads the small group, and knows his Bible. He is arguably the most righteous man in the nation.
But in the unshielded presence of absolute holiness, his mouth is stopped.
It reminds me of the Apostle Paul in Romans 3:12, where he says that the law speaks so that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world held accountable to God.
Isaiah has run out of arguments. Notice specifically what Isaiah confesses is polluted. He says, "For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips."
Right. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts.
The very instrument of his prophetic calling, his lips, the tool he uses for ministry, is the exact thing he realizes is utterly tainted by sin.
He recognizes that his best deeds, his most righteous prophetic sermons, fall infinitely short of the standard.
It is like a brilliant heart surgeon washing up for a critical operation.
Okay, I like this analogy.
They scrub their hands, they put on the gloves, they are ready to save a life. But right as they look down at the tray of scalpels and clamps, they realize the instruments are covered in rust, bacteria, and toxic mold.
Oh, man. How can you perform the task if your tools are fundamentally contaminated?
You can't. You would end up killing the patient you are trying to save.
So Isaiah realizes he cannot speak for God because his equipment is legally compromised.
The text makes a stark point here that challenges our entire modern framework.
What's that?
Sin is not a lack of education. It is not a psychological wound. It is not a sociological disadvantage. Sin is uncleanness before a holy king.
Right.
It is a fatal, systemic corruption of the human nature. Without this assumption of radical corruption, any evangelistic effort is a fool's errand.
We are not going out to tell people they are a little bit broken and just need some minor adjustments.
No, the biblical text insists that humanity is spiritually dead and requires resurrection.
This is why the modern church misdiagnoses the world. If you think the deepest human problem is ignorance, then your version of missions just becomes education.
Let's build schools.
Right. If you think the problem is poverty, missions becomes economics.
Let's build businesses.
If you think the problem is political oppression, missions becomes activism. But if the deepest problem is objective guilt and uncleanness before a holy God, then missions must proclaim atonement and reconciliation.
It has to deal with the wrath of God.
Because Isaiah is entirely passive and incapable of fixing his own ruin, he cannot scrub the rust off his own instruments. To use your analogy, the solution must invade from the outside.
Notice what Isaiah doesn't do here. He doesn't pull himself together. He doesn't promise to do better next time.
He doesn't climb up to the altar to cleanse himself.
Mercy has to initiate the movement. Mercy has to come to him.
And it does, in a terrifying, bloody, and invasive way. We get to the altar of propitiation. Isaiah is trembling on the floor waiting for the executioner's block, but instead one of the seraphim flies to him with a live coal in his hand. The Hebrew word is ritzpah.
And the angel has taken this burning coal with tongs from the altar. We have to dive into the Levitical theology happening in this moment.
Go for it.
The altar is not just a heavenly fireplace to keep the temple warm. The altar is the specific place where blood is shed.
Right.
It is the place of sacrifice. It is where the innocent substitute is slaughtered in the place of the guilty worshiper.
The fire on the altar represents the holy wrath of God that has been poured out and consumed the sacrifice.
So that coal isn't just hot rock. It is completely soaked in the concept of substitutionary blood and satisfied justice.
The seraph touches the burning coal to Isaiah's mouth. The very place of his confessed uncleanness is met with the fire of the altar.
And the seraph declares, "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for."
The Hebrew verb used there for atoned for or covered is tekupar. I know there is some serious grammatical weight to that specific word.
Yes, tekupar is in the intensive, pool imperfect form.
Okay, stop right there. Pool imperfect. Give me the explain it like I'm five version. What does that mean for someone who doesn't read ancient Hebrew?
Sure. It means the action is passive for the subject, but intensive in its execution.
Okay.
Think of a patient on an operating table under heavy anesthesia. The patient isn't participating in the surgery.
They aren't handing the doctor the scalpel.
Exactly. They are completely unconscious, totally passive. The surgeon is doing 100% of the work to them.
Wow.
That is the pool form. Isaiah is receiving an atonement that has been objectively and sovereignly achieved entirely outside of his own effort.
So grace is not God shrugging his shoulders and lowering his standard.
Yeah.
Grace isn't God saying, hey, nobody's perfect, don't worry about it. Grace is God providing a bloody substitute to meet the absolute standard of holiness on behalf of the sinner.
Yes, the holy God who exposes the sin through his unapproachable light is the exact same God who provides the covering for it through the altar.
This completely dismantles the liberal theological concept that people can simply choose to do better.
It really does. Atonement is invasive.
Yeah.
It requires a supernatural intervention. You cannot self-atone.
But I want to ask about the physical sensation described here. A burning coal pressed against human lips. The lips are one of the most sensitive parts of the human body.
Yeah.
Is the text suggesting that justification, while saving us, is also a painful destruction of our pride?
The imagery absolutely implies a searing, refining process. The fire of God's holiness consumes sin.
Right.
For the unrepentant, that fire is experienced as eternal judgment. But for the justified, that fire consumes the guilt through a substitute, yet it still burns away the ego.
Isaiah is reduced to absolute zero before he is built back up.
The removal of our self-reliance is often a painful severing. We like to think we contribute something to our salvation, even if it's just our good intentions.
The burning coal sears all of that away. It is a necessary trauma to apply the grace of the altar.
While the altar coal provided a real, objective covering for Isaiah in that moment in 740 BC, we have to look at the bigger picture.
Because that coal, that altar, the blood, it was all pointing forward to a much greater final sacrifice that would permanently satisfy divine justice.
We have to look at the Christological reality of this vision.
Yeah.
We cannot read Isaiah 6 as just a detached historical document or an isolated mystical experience.
No.
The New Testament gives us explicit, infallible commentary on what Isaiah actually saw that day.
In the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 41, the Apostle John is reflecting on the ministry of Jesus, and he states clearly that Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him.
Here's where it gets really interesting. John is saying that the king on the throne, the Adonai high and lifted up, the one causing the thresholds to shake and the seraphim to hide their faces, was the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ.
It is a massive paradigm shift. Christ fulfills every single dimension of this vision.
He does. He is the final prophet, speaking the Father's word perfectly, unlike Isaiah who had unclean lips.
He is the great high priest who doesn't just take a coal from an earthly altar, but enters the heavenly reality to secure eternal redemption.
And he is the King of Kings, to whom all authority in heaven and on earth has been given. Earthly kings like Uzziah die in disgrace. Jesus dies in glory and rises to rule forever.
And the fiery coal itself is a prophetic type of the cross of Calvary. In the fullness of time, God did not just send a six-winged angel with a coal on a pair of tongs.
He sent his only begotten Son to become the ultimate sacrifice.
On the cross, Jesus absorbed the infinite burning wrath of God against sin. The law demands absolute purity. We do not have it.
The gospel provides the perfect obedience of Christ, which is imputed, or legally credited, to the account of the believer.
At the cross, you see the perfect intersection of the two themes in Isaiah's vision: absolute holiness and invasive grace.
God's holiness demands that sin be punished. God's grace provides his own Son to bear that punishment.
The staggering contrast here is what really gets me. Think about the two scenes. In Isaiah 6, you have the untouchable Lord of hosts. The foundations of the temple are shaking, smoke is billowing everywhere, and sinless angels are terrified to look at him.
Right.
And then you fast forward to the upper room in the Gospels. You have the incarnate Jesus, the exact same person, wrapping a towel around his waist, getting down on his knees, and washing his disciples' dirt-caked feet.
It's unbelievable.
He lets them touch him. He lets John lean against his chest. Does knowing that Jesus is the terrifying king on the throne actually magnify the gentleness he displayed on earth?
It amplifies it infinitely. The incarnation is not God abandoning his holiness. It is God veiling his blinding glory in true human flesh to accomplish salvation.
The Jesus who wept at the tomb of Lazarus, the Jesus who held children in his arms, and the Jesus who was spat upon and beaten by Roman soldiers is the very same sovereign Lord before whom the seraphim hid their faces.
He allowed himself to be treated as unclean so that we, who are actually unclean, could be made holy.
At the cross, holy justice and holy mercy meet perfectly. God is far more holy than we ever imagined, and far more gracious than we ever dared to hope.
It is only after a person is completely crushed by the reality of that law and then entirely justified by the finished work of Christ that they are finally ready to hear the call.
You cannot skip straight to the work. You have to pass through the fire.
That brings us to the vocation and the doxological mandate. Look at the sequence of events.
After Isaiah is justified, his guilt removed, he is suddenly permitted to hear the divine counsel.
The voice of the Lord speaks, asking, "Whom shall I send and who will go for us?"
And Isaiah, the man who just moments ago was ruined, weeping on the floor and struck dumb, immediately responds with absolute readiness, "Here am I, send me."
The order of operations here is everything. Revelation of God's unapproachable holiness. Recognition of radical human depravity.
Substitutionary atonement from the altar. And finally, commission.
You cannot bypass the altar and leap onto the mission field.
No, you cannot just volunteer out of human enthusiasm or guilt or a desire for an adventure without first passing through the fire of justification.
If you try to go without the coal touching your lips, you will go out with a misdiagnosed message. You will preach sociology instead of salvation.
We need to talk about the motivation for going. We use the phrase doxological mandate. Let's unpack the word doxological.
It comes from the Greek word doxa, which means glory. It means our mandate, our reason for evangelism, is driven entirely by the glory of God.
There is a very famous quote from John Piper that captures this perfectly. He says, "Missions exist because worship doesn't."
Yes, worship is the eternal goal. Missions is a temporary rescue operation that ceases the moment Christ returns.
There will be no evangelism in the new heavens and the new earth because everyone there will be worshiping.
This entirely removes guilt manipulation from the equation. Have you ever sat through a missions presentation where the speaker tries to make you feel terrible about your comfortable life, showing pictures of poverty to guilt you into giving money or going overseas?
Absolutely. The whole, if you really loved God, you would sell everything and move to a jungle approach.
Right. And while compassion for the needy is a valid Christian virtue, it is a terrible primary engine for long-term endurance.
Human need is an endless, exhausting ocean.
If you are driven only by guilt or empathy, you will eventually burn out. A doxological motive means we do not go primarily because people are needy.
We go primarily because the triune God is infinitely worthy of the praise of all nations.
We go to reclaim the glory that is rightfully his from the darkest corners of the earth.
But I want to look at what God actually calls Isaiah to do, because Isaiah's specific calling was brutal.
It was incredibly tough.
God essentially tells him, "Go and say to this people, keep on hearing but do not understand. Keep on seeing but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy and blind their eyes."
God tells Isaiah that his preaching is actually going to harden people's hearts. There is a massive warning against evangelistic triumphalism here.
We like to think that if we preach the gospel clearly enough, everyone will get saved and the culture will be fixed.
But how does a doxological motive protect a messenger from burning out when they look out at their community and see zero visible results?
If your motivation is simply human success, church growth, or measurable statistical metrics, You will quit the moment people reject the message.
If you measure your faithfulness by the size of your congregation or the number of converts, an assignment like Isaiah's will destroy you.
But if your calling is anchored in the unshakable worthiness of the king on the throne, your perseverance is not dependent on the audience's reaction.
Isaiah's faithfulness, not his visible success, was the measure of his obedience.
The holy God called him to proclaim a true message, and the messenger continues simply because the king remains worthy of having his truth spoken, whether the world listens or not.
That flips our whole modern paradigm upside down. We are obsessed with results. We want the spreadsheet to show that our strategies are working.
But Isaiah shows us that true success is obediently speaking the words of a holy God, trusting that God is in charge of the harvest.
If true calling begins with being undone by holiness and cleansed by grace, it leads to a very challenging question for us today.
What if the greatest barrier to reaching the unreached nations is not a lack of funding?
What if it isn't a lack of marketing strategy or a lack of travel options?
What if the greatest barrier is simply that the modern church has forgotten how to tremble before the Holy One in our own local congregations?
We have traded reverence for relevance. We wanted to make God approachable, so we made him common.
But if we lose the holiness of God, we lose the gravity of sin.
If we lose the gravity of sin, we lose the necessity of the cross.
And if we lose the cross, we lose any actual reason to cross the street, let alone cross an ocean, to preach to the lost.
We must return to a theology that lets the absolute holiness of God practically motivate us to labor. We labor so that the Lamb who was slain may receive the full reward of his suffering.
It all comes right back to that initial diagnosis. We cannot settle for handing out Band-Aids when the great physician has provided a radical, bloody, permanent cure.
The world doesn't need another social program dressed up in religious language.
The world needs to know that the King of the universe is holy, that we are guilty, and that he has provided a way of escape through the sacrifice of his own son.
Let that thought evaluate your own view of God's majesty. Is your God too small? Or is he the Lord of hosts, whose glory fills the earth?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time on Reformed Thinking.